Can you commence the broadcast and confirm?
Yeah, broadcast is commenced.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Partnership Development Committee. Before we commence the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. Please only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman that you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce the speakers in the order which the request to speak has been made, unless there is a point of order which we will give way. Please minimise all distractions while you're in the meeting. Members are asked to keep your microphones muted when you are not speaking and to consider turning off your video if you have interference on your connection to the meeting. Please bear in mind that there is a lag between speakers and other attendees hearing you. There is no presentations for this evening, so all presentations will be by verbal presentation by the attending officers. There's also no reports for this evening's meeting also. There's no private session for this meeting. However, should we need to move into private session, it is members' responsibility to make sure that their venue and connection is private. If members lose connection to this meeting, please rejoin and we readmit you. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed to requesting to speak or to make a point of order. The chat function is subject to access to information regimes of FOI, EIR. It is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation and the Council's Code of Conduct. For this meeting, councillors are identified with a prefix of CLLR before their name. Officers have a prefix as officers. There's a minute taken for this meeting and there is one meeting facilitator. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate and may proceed. I can also confirm that this is a non-decision making meeting of the Partnership Development Scrutiny Committee. This meeting has been set up to not allow officers to give evidence to the membership of this committee and no formal decisions will be taken this evening. The Partnership Development Committee consists of the following members. The Chairman is Mary Cunningham, the Vice Chairman is John Courtauld. The remaining members of the committee are John Ball, Andrew Hensman, Trevor McArdle, Jackie Pell, Jenny Sandham, Paul Thorogood, Lynn Walters. This evening we have had apologies from the Chairman, Mrs Mary Cunningham, and also from Mrs Lynn Walters. For this meeting, we have officers in attendance. These include Stuart Thompson and Steve Wilson. There's also the Corporate Director in attendance, Sherry Root. The meeting facilitator is myself, Emma Wisby, and the clerk is Jessica Mann. Chairman, I will now hand the meeting over to you and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by welcoming you all to this virtual meeting of the Partnership Development Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor George Courtauld, Vice Chairman of this committee, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening in the absence of the Chairman, Councillor Mary Cunningham. Unfortunately, she's unable to be with us this evening. Even though she isn't able to be with us tonight, I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome Councillor Mrs Lynn Walters to the committee. Councillor Mrs Walters has joined to replace Councillor Ian Pritchard, who has now stepped down from the committee. For this meeting, I'm being assisted by a governance officer and a meeting facilitator, who will help me identify when people want to speak and manage the notifications through the chat function. Please let me know using the chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Please also remember to mute your microphones when you finish speaking. Members, for this meeting, when I seek your agreement, silence will be taken as assent. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers for this meeting, I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Mrs Cunningham and Councillor Mrs Walters. Do we have any other apologies for absence?
Chairman, all other members are in attendance. Sorry, I do apologise. We've got no further apologies. My apologies there, sir.
Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest. Please indicate you wish to speak in the chat function.
Chairman, there's no indication in the chat function. Thank you.
I will proceed to item 3 then, minutes of the previous meeting. Members, for this item, I'll be seeking your agreement. Therefore, silence will be assent. However, if a member wishes to raise an issue in respect of the minutes, please indicate via the chat function. Do any members have any objection to the approval of the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 31st of March 2021? Thank you, members. Your silence is agreement that the minutes are an accurate record. We now proceed to item 4, public question time. Members, there are no registered speakers for this evening's public question time, so I'll proceed to item 5, scrutiny review into enforcement procedures at Braintree District Council, the second evidence gathering session. Members, we have officers in attendance this evening from the Council's operations team. The officers are Steve Wilson, Operations Manager, and Stuart Thompson, Assistant Manager, Street Scene. Steve and Stuart are here to support our evidence gathering for the scrutiny review, and I would like to start by welcoming them both to the meeting. In a moment, I will ask the officers to introduce themselves to you all and provide a brief background as to their respective roles and their initial views, experience of partnership working in enforcement. I will then invite members to ask questions of Steve and Stuart. Once again, welcome Steve and Stuart, and thank you for taking the time to attend the meeting this evening. Could I please ask you to introduce yourselves to the committee and provide a brief background to your roles within the organisation?
Thank you, Chair. My name's Steve Wilson. Good evening, councillors, as well, I should say. I'm the operations manager for the council. I lead and manage all the frontline services through a dedicated management team, which includes waste and recycling, and the BDC part of Cordons Farm, grounds maintenance, street cleansing, transport, including both the HGV and plant workshops, the markets, and also street scene protection. But Stuart is a part of my team. I report directly to Paul Partridge. Some of you may know him as head of service of operations, and Stuart and his team, they report directly to me. Stuart will talk in a moment a little bit about the job roles and responsibilities for his team. I'm just going to start by saying the structure for the street scene protection team is quite a small team. There's only 6 officers plus Stuart. The areas they split up into is there's 4 areas within the district: northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, and they interact between each other's areas depending on workload. So I'll at this point, I think I'll just pass over to Stuart, and he can introduce himself and just go through the job roles and responsibilities of his team. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Stuart. I'm the assistant manager of the enforcement team. Within my team, as Steve said, we break it down into 4 areas, and each one of those areas has a street scene protection officer, and that person is responsible for all of the environmental crime, nuisance, ASB, dogs not under proper control, vast realm of different things, and they take responsibility for that area with me in charge of them. We also have an apprentice who's learning the role. She's been with us for about 3 years now, coming along really well. And we have a street scene warden. The street scene warden is out and about in the district. He looks for stuff, being very proactive, also goes out, inspects abandoned vehicles, etc. and stuff like that. We also get him out searching fly tips and things like that. I can go further into the role if you wish, but I know you do have it all on the paperwork that was provided to you.
Okay. Is there any questions so far? I mean, I know it's early doors, but if there's any questions, I'd welcome them as we go along. Okay. Now, it's been a very challenging 12 months, I would say. It's we've had with COVID going on, particularly in the enforcement team. As you're probably all aware, there've been enforcement powers issued by government in terms of what we can do in terms of managing COVID as a compliance, and that's owned by Environmental Health. We have worked tirelessly to support environmental health with our officers in doing high street patrols and providing intelligence back in terms of any enforcement requirements that environmental health could take on board. And we've also supported by, initially we were doing business visits as well when that was going on. It has been a challenge, I have to say. Early in 2020, when we first went into lockdown, we saw an increase in our environment offences. It was particularly because of, I would say, the green waste service, which we suspended at that time. We saw an increase in, obviously, bonfires going on. And we've also, with what's been going on, there's been an increase in people living at home and actually experiencing more neighbour issues, shall I say. The biggest challenge for our enforcement team on street scene protection has been probably interviews under caution, and also interviews under caution, and actually fitting noise equipment, because we couldn't get into any of the, obviously, the premises, and we do that again in partnership with Environmental Health. They're the experts on noise, and they would normally install that equipment in there. I'm going to hand back to Stuart now and just talk a little bit about the other partnerships that Stuart works with, because he works with, obviously, the police, he works with the Environment Agency, and we also work with a lot of other local authorities, and we have a community hub where all the different partners get together to discuss what's evident at the moment. So I'll just hand back to Stuart quickly and ask him to just talk a little bit about that. Stuart?
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, as Steve said, with our role, because of the wide range of what we do, partnership working is crucial. We have a very large crossover with our work, with our colleagues in Environmental Health, where they'll deal with statutory nuisance other than dog barking. All other type of nuisance comes to us. So the difference between a statutory nuisance will be loud music, loud TVs, amplified music, that type of thing. Any other type of noise is investigated by my team, but we do it alongside our colleagues in Environmental Health. They help us out. We also work very closely with our colleagues in licensing, especially in relation to dog breeding businesses. We work together all the time on that, as well as scrap metal dealers. Both of us have the powers to deal with that, and we work together to do that. Also, very close working relationship internally with the community safety team. The ASB, they help put together the processes, etc. And it's my team that do the enforcement. So we go out and do the actual enforcement, serving notices, doing closures, or whichever needed. And we're actually working more and more now with the homeless and housing team, especially around the area where we've been getting we should call them rough sleepers. We've had lots of complaints. They've tried to help them. Some of them declined that help. So now it's more coming over to my team, but we work with them, with the housing team and the homeless team too, as well as taking enforcement action to try and support these people as well. Externally, we have a very, very close working relationship with Essex Police, in particular the community policing team. So that's your local team that work within the community. We also work with the rural crime, and we have quite a lot of working with the Op Raptor team. They deal mainly with county line drug gangs coming in. We have quite a good working relationship with them, sharing intelligence, etc. Housing associations as well. We've got quite a lot of housing associations within the district. The largest one is Eastlight. Got a very close working relationship with them. I have monthly meetings with the area managers there, and we've now actually put processes in place where they can use the antisocial behaviour legislation to take it up to a written warning. and I've helped them do that. I've given them templates, etc., of what they can cover and what they can't. They'll take it all the way through, and if it gets to the stage of they've issued the warning and it continues, they will then now compile a report to us, send it over. We will then look at serving the notice, and then we take that case on for enforcement. I also my team works very closely with Essex County Council and Veolia. In particular, we have the household waste recycling centres in Witham and Braintree, and sometimes they get hit where commercial waste is being taken into the sites. The sites aren't licensed to take commercial waste. They have no enforcement powers, so they rely on us, and we have a very good working relationship with them. We also work alongside RSPCA, got a good working relationship with the local inspectors. We've quite often done warrants, etc., with them. They contact us all the time. We stay in contact with them. And other authorities. All our other authorities in Essex, we have part of the Cleaner Essex group. We work together on that. Have a vast contact network. Some of our people doing environmental crime don't stick to one area and cross border. So we share our intelligence, and if we need to do joint investigations, joint prosecutions, then we will do that. And we also do that further afield. Obviously, we border Suffolk, and we've done a joint investigation with Baber before now, prosecution. So that's fine. And obviously the Environment Agency, so the bigger environmental crime that's going on is quite often taken on by the Environment Agency. We work alongside them to do that. So if there's any questions in relation to that.
Actually, I'd quite like to ask a question. As acting chairman, can I put myself ahead of the queue? Stuart and Steve, I represent 4 quite rural parishes, and what seems to drive people hopping mad, without being specific, is the noise of music on sort of Saturday nights and from parties and things like that. And the other thing that drives them bonkers is people, especially in this year of the virus, of people dumping their building rubble or corrugated asbestos or whatever it may be on land, private land belonging to farmers or whatever, and then the farmers refusing to clear it up because they say it's too expensive and they can farm around it. And as I understand it, it's not the district council's waste role to clear up anything on private land. Is that correct? Firstly, I assume it is correct. And secondly, with these music issues, I mean, do people actually have, you've got such a small team, how do you do people have to tape the racket and send it to you, or how do we, I mean, I've tried to be, invariably when they ring me, it's over, thank goodness, because if they rang me at 1:15 on a Saturday night, I'd be irritated myself. But how do you deal with both those two? Those have been 2 really recurring things, and even in this year when we're not supposed to having parties, I've had complaints about loud music. I think people got quite sort of bitter about other people having fun when they were trapped indoors. So sorry, those are really 2 questions, but
yes, I can answer those. So in relation to loud music, predominantly that's enforced by our colleagues in environmental health, although sometimes with loud music you get other types of noise that goes along with it. Regardless, the report's made, we decide between the teams who's going to investigate it, what action to take. We do have an out of hours service on a Friday and Saturday night between the hours of 8 and 1, where an officer can come out and witness. So that's an option. But what they need to do, anyone who's suffering with it, like I say, you can make the call to the main council number out of hours on those nights, and it will be logged and they will try and come out. Alternatively, if it's during the week, you make the report, one of us will take the case on. If they identify where it's come from in the first instance, we'll send a letter, make them aware of the allegation. We never divulge who the complainant is. We send them diary sheets to keep a log in case it's happening midweek, late at night or something where they can keep a log. We'll get those back. Then we have the option of installing the noise monitoring equipment, which we are now doing again. And if at the end of the investigation we're happy it's a nuisance, then a notice will be served.
Brilliant. Well, I shall remember that. And the rubble on private land, I mean, you must have seen it. I mean, I've seen sort of great heaps of the stuff in the middle of fields and people just doing nothing about it. It upsets people because they don't move to the countryside to look at a heap of rubble. I'm sure it annoys the landowner, but how do you force the landowner to do anything about it, or can you not? Because it's jolly. I rang up one specific landowner because everyone was complaining about his heap, and he said he couldn't afford it and he wasn't going to do it.
Yeah. So you're right. The local authority will not use taxpayers' money to remove waste from private land.
Yeah.
We will, however, investigate offences committed on private land. The offence is still there, whether it's private or public land. It's depositing of waste on land without a licence or permit to accept it. We've done many prosecutions for people for actually doing that.
Right.
We also have, like when it's quite rural, if it's becoming a regular problem, we have options on how to investigate that, cameras, etc. So we will do that. But a landowner has a duty to keep their land clear of waste, and we can force them to remove that waste.
Right, interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you very much.
No problem.
So let me carry on.
Sorry,
I'll carry.
sorry for interrupting. As Chairman,
sorry. You want? Cherry, I think I'm supposed to be asking you to speak. Sorry.
That's fine. Chairman Stewart has responded. So my issue was around environmental health because they look after statutory nuisance in terms of noise. But Stewart responded in terms of the out of hours service as well. So I don't need to come in now.
So now is it Councillor Jenny Sandham's turn to speak? I think it is.
Yes, please, Chairman.
That function. Jenny, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so I had a couple of questions. One was about litter, because that's something that gets people very upset. And we've got a lot of regular litter pickers through the Green Heart scheme, and people have been saying it's a lot of McDonald's. And I don't know, I know there's a form where you can report it. And if you see someone actually throwing it out of their car, if you get the license plate, you can report that as well. Is there any other sort of way that people kind of catch people who are throwing this litter?
So, for instance, for the fast food litter, especially McDonald's, if you find McDonald's food packaging and there's a receipt inside it, provide us with that and we can carry out an investigation. We are able to identify the vehicle that made the purchase. I'm not saying we can always get the person, but we can carry out an investigation into it. Same thing again, if you ever witness anyone littering, if you're following behind a vehicle and it's thrown out, there's a report form on the website, put that through and we will carry out an investigation and come back to the person. Okay.
And you don't need, like if you're in your car, you wouldn't need a photo of them throwing the actual litter out. You just, yeah, just.
So the one thing we have to be careful of, when we're getting reports from members of the public, I'm going from members of the public who are reporting litter being thrown out of a vehicle, we will do a P&C, we will identify the vehicle. We don't need to expect a photograph or nothing like that. If they can take one, even better. If they don't, it doesn't matter. We'll still carry out an investigation. Depending on the response we get from the person in the vehicle, depends on how far we will take it. Because if you've got a member of the public saying they did it and a member of the public saying they didn't do it, and we've got no evidence to back it up, then obviously it can be a bit more difficult. You know, if someone sends through a dash cam footage, that's a totally different thing.
Right. Okay.
Can I just also add, Councillor, that obviously through the Cleaner Essex group, we do a lot of campaigning to try and prevent that sort of activity going on. So Stuart and his team are part of that campaigning, whether it's dog fouling, whether it's littering. We do a lot of work with the Cleaner Essex group in doing that. I've personally been involved with the Cleaner Counties group as well, which continues to talk to Highways England, and we used to have. We have a code of practice for tackling litter with Highways England that it's about probably our ethos in terms of education, prevention before intervention and enforcement, depending on what the environmental issue is. Of course, if it's a criminal offence being committed, then Stuart will go straight in with enforcement because that's what he needs to do. But that's what we would do. as well, tackling litter. I mean, unfortunately, it seems to be the way of the world. So that's how we, that's as Stuart said it, that's how he explains it as well. We do use CCTV as well for fly tippers in particular, as you probably aware, to try in some of the hotspot areas, to try and capture those offenders as well. Okay.
Yes.
Councillor Moore, I think you'd like to.
Oh, sorry. I just had one more, just if that's all right. Just
sorry.
You mentioned viola, and there's an environmental working group that's part of Fearing Parish Council, and before COVID they were really interested in being able to go and visit and see how the recycling is processed and what makes a bag of recycling get rejected and that sort of thing. I don't know whether as things open up that will be possible to arrange.
Chairman, if I may, the questions from members are in the context of the scrutiny review through partnership working and enforcement. I appreciate Councillor Sunderland has got an interesting question regarding recycling and the availability of the site going forward, but that's not within the context of this scrutiny review. And I'm just mindful that officers' time is valuable. So whilst there may be some interesting questions members may wish to pose to the officers who are involved in recycling and waste, I would remind you that your questions should be in the context of partnership working and looking at enforcement through that partnership working lens. I do apologise for interrupting. Thank you, Chairman.
So thank you, Councillor Sandham. I think we're going to move on to Councillor Ball, if that's okay. John, your question.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to Councillor Sandham's question about litter, I just wonder, this problem of food cartons from fast food suppliers has been one of the sort of veins that run through all of council work since I became a councillor about 14 years ago, and there has been talk about working with the outlets, but I've picked up fast food cartons and placed them in the bins, but I've never once found a receipt in them. I think, once you've eaten it, you make sure that the receipt is out. Is there any way that cartons could have a serial number or something? It's obviously a very difficult thing to crack, but are there any ongoing discussions with food outlets to make sure, try to make sure that whoever discards a carton is tracked down?
Let me start the answer to that question, Councillor. We have trialled with some brands, fast food, where we've actually done a trial with them, where they have used that receipt, as you're aware. It wasn't particularly successful, mainly from the fast food. They couldn't cope, they couldn't keep up with it, I think, putting the IDs on receipts and that, so it didn't really work. We do a lot of partnership working with those groups. In fact, in the Great British Spring Clean, we're trying to organise with McDonald's and KFC to do a community litter pick around that area, and we are looking at alternative bins that make it easy to dispose of that type of waste. I think with the government consultations coming up with packaging in particular, there'll be obviously in the future, I think there'll be some feedback in terms of how companies package their food going forward, whether that's a biodegradable container or whatever it might be. I think the central government will make those decisions in the years to come. I think at the moment the council was just replying to consultations on that type of activity. Stuart and his team work effortlessly to try and tackle them environmental offences, but it's difficult. It is a very difficult one to answer. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Stuart.
Yeah, I think all to say is, yeah, as you said, we do work very closely with our fast food outlets, especially up Galleys Corner. We do have a good working relationship with them. They do assist us in every way with our investigations. As I said, yeah, we've tried the registrations now, and it's just, if you see the amount of traffic that goes through there, they can't cope with that. We do find quite a few receipts, to be fair. I'm not saying we do try our best to follow it up. They do go out, they do litter pick, and they don't just litter pick around Galleys Corner, they do go out further afield. And if you find that certain areas getting quite hit with their food packaging, they will go out there and clear it. We can't necessarily blame them. We've got to blame the people that buy it. Those sort of people are the same ones who'll buy a can of Coca-Cola from the shop and throw that out the window as well. It's the person, not necessarily the outlet.
Are you happy with that answer, John?
Yes, that's fine.
Councillor Andrew Hensman, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, mine's kind of round the Big Bad Council, where I think it's the fixed penalty notice, the FPNs, where the revenue goes from, because as far as I know, it's not for general coffers. It's got to go back into, as Steve said earlier, the education and so on. But with partnership, where a couple of colleagues have said about trialing something, I did actually write to McDonald's UK and say, here's a very easy idea, but never got nothing back. So whether there's an alternative forum, or whether you have a different ear to what the public has, that I could say, here, John saying about serial numbers, I come up with something similar, but using the EPOS system, and it's very easy because of the way that I know how their process works. But another one equally is the Environment Agency, because they come up quite a lot in the sense that you've got your waste carriers, but you've also got, if there's any damage to the environment itself from contamination of land, and it was how you get involved with an agency such as them.
Okay, so in relation to the fast food outlet, it would be best if you contact our comms team. They do have various contacts with, especially McDonald's nationwide, so she might be able to help you with that. I only deal with the local restaurants, so I wouldn't have any other contacts outside of that. Regarding the Environment Agency, yes, I have contacts with environment officers and the waste crime team. So it depends when they take a case on or when we take a case on. It depends on the size, etc. But we work together to do that. Yeah, we also have the ability. So if someone's disposing of waste that's hazardous to the environment or human health, we can take action for that, and we do take action for that. So our powers are very similar. They take on more of the larger jobs, but we do work with them. Not say I have lots of contacts with the Suffolk branch and the Essex branch and the waste crime team.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to ask another question if you finished, Andrew, or have you got more to add?
There was just the clarification as to where the revenue goes from the FPNs, and I think if I'm right, it's got to go to education. It can't go to general coffers.
Yeah, it goes back into that. We don't see it in my side. Sherry may be able to elaborate on that more. She's got a hand up, so I'll let her answer that question.
Sherry, far away.
Right, so it's not a simple answer, Councillor Hensman, is the short answer, I'm afraid. So it depends on what the FPN's for. and what the rules are around what needs to happen with the funding, because as Stuart's explained, he's got a very broad spectrum of the things that he enforces for. Some of them are under different regulations, and so depending on what regulations they enforce for depends on what happens with the revenue that comes back in from that. So that will part of it is about funding enforcement in its totality. So make sure that we can do that. Some of it has to go in ring-fenced to specific activity, but it isn't one rule for all of it, all FPNs and all enforcement.
Thank you.
Stephen Stewart, if I may now butt in yet again, the power's going to my head here. I noticed on our terms of reference for the scrutiny committee, we were asked at our last ever evidence gathering session, and I can see we ought to ask now, if there's anything you've done over the last 12 months, maybe any new regulations that have come in or any new way of doing things that you think are good or worth continuing with, or have changed the way you do things, or in fact are bad. Has the virus actually been useful in any way, and are you doing anything differently that is making things easier? I don't know who wants to answer that, but it's something we're supposed to be questioning what's been happening in the last 12 months. So I'm posing that question.
So there was some enforcement powers in terms of compliance to COVID restrictions that was which was brought into force. As I said earlier on, Councillor, these powers are being managed and led by environmental health, and we act as the intelligence to feed back to them in terms of what enforcement that they decide to take, if any, regarding non-compliance of those regulations. I don't think any other new regulations have come in other than that. Stuart, do you recall anything else coming in?
No, so I don't think it's so much of any more powers coming in relation to changing our working practice. It did cause us some issues when it was at its height. So interviews under caution, as Steve mentioned earlier, we had to try and avoid those where possible. Sometimes you couldn't, but we couldn't do it in the council offices where we normally would. So we was using the police station, and obviously going to witness nuisance. As I said, we go out, we witness nuisance, etc. Noise is one thing, if you can get noise equipment in, or it can be recorded some way. But one of the other quite common ones we get is odour, and it's normally from cannabis. Well, the only way you're ever going to tell that is you go out there and have a sniff. And that wasn't always, we weren't able to do that because we couldn't get into people's property. So that did cause a challenge, and we tried to try and work our way around that, such as just going to the outside of a property, etc. So them type things have been a challenge. As to new ways of working, most of my team have been working from home. They can still do their duties from home. They don't need to be in this office. They've got the computers, they've got the vehicles, they'll go out, deal with dogs and witness whatever they need to do. So it's more of a new way of working. Then that's fine. The only challenges, like I said, was witnessing stuff and carrying out interviews under caution, which, yeah, we'd be glad to get back to normal so we can just get on with those properly, really.
Here. I think Councillor Mrs. Pell would like to speak. I've lost you. Oh, there you are. Would you like to speak, Jackie?
Thank you, George. Littering seems to go in waves. You have a campaign and everybody becomes a bit more aware that they shouldn't be doing it. Then the novelty wears off a bit and they all start chucking it about again. Because at the moment, you're beginning to see it more in the hedgerows and that, where they just chuck it out the window. Are we allowed to name and shame them if we catch them? I know they're probably fined, but is that enough? Name and shame might go that little bit further.
If I may answer that one, there is some sensitivities around naming and shaming. Just because somebody has received a fixed penalty notice, and sorry, I give this information as one of the council's former litigators and prosecutors and one of the legal advisors, but I'm also responsible for data protection. There are huge amounts of sensitivity. So if somebody has received a fixed penalty notice, they have not necessarily committed an offence. It's quite a technical process. So to name and shame somebody where they've not been dealt with in a public forum has led to some authorities being criticised by the courts and the Information Commissioner, particularly around matters that have even been reported in open court. So if we've taken a prosecution into the Magistrates' Court and it's dealt with in open session, there is still matters that we have to take into consideration about the processing of that data. So there are ways that we can deal with it, but it's not an automatic we can name and shame. It's become more complicated over the last few years, particularly with judgments of the Information Commissioner, who's ultimately the regulator on how we use that personal data. So it's not straightforward. Officers have used naming and shaming in sensitive ways to deliver messages regarding waste and litter expectations on disposal. But this is where one of the partnership workings comes on enforcement. So myself and my colleague advising on data protection, we work with Stuart and Steve's teams to make sure that part of the enforcement tools, as we know, are not just around prosecutions, they are also about education and information, that they take their steps in compliance with the legislation under which they're working with, but also to ensure that the authority does not step into arenas where we will be looked at through the regulators on the use of data. So it is not a simple process, but it is possible. I hope that answers your question, Mrs. Pell.
I think Councillor Hensman would like to come back. Andrew, have you got something to say?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Jackie's reminded me that we are in the presence of a TV star, and therefore continuing the theme of partnership, would Channel 5 come under that? Because obviously it showed the process, it showed what happens, it shows how the guys were out there and doing things. Okay, there is a little bit of artistic license when the programmers edit, but principally it was very interesting, and it's actually currently on the rerun channels at the moment, Stuart. So yeah, you're back on there.
What I would say regarding that, anyone we spoke to that was on camera, the film crew actually went up and they got them to fill out a consent form. So they got their consent. If they didn't get their consent, their faces would be blurred, etc. So they got consent on everyone before that was to be aired.
But just to build on that as well, Councillor, with your permission, Chairman, it is actually an unusual enforcement tool. Part of campaigns is about bringing regulation and control to the wider public attention. So while it's not a traditional partnership that we would recognise in day-to-day life, working with the media is an enforcement method, as Stuart has said. It does highlight those who are involved, it shows the sanctions available, and sometimes the best message for enforcement is for people to see it through the eyes of media. So whether we can find research that shows the impact of such television programmes, how they impact on people's behaviours on litter and things, I'm not too sure, but it is an unusual partnership working, because obviously there's a lot of work that goes into making these programmes. It's not just to sensationalise the role of the local government officer, it is about that public use of sort of taxpayers' money to control matters, and it is an unusual partnership working, as I said. So in terms of your evidence gathering, it's something that is quite unique to probably waste and littering, that you won't probably see so much in some of the other services that you'll have evidence from part of this review. So I'd like to think that it's something that probably the authority would be embracing in going forward, should the right circumstances arise with the right service.
Does anyone have any more questions? Right. Before we bring this evidence gathering session to a close then, assuming none of you have any questions, I would just like to thank you, members. This concludes our evidence gathering session. Thank you very much, Steve and Stuart. We're all very grateful for your attendance and the responses provided. Members, based on the information gathered this evening, we now need to consider any further lines of inquiry you wish to pursue in order to inform our scrutiny review. Do members have any suggestions? Please indicate on the chat function if you wish to speak.
Chairman, if it's just members, if members are wanting to think about this for in light of the information they received from Stuart and Steve this evening, we can invite members to pose questions to the governance service to then put back to our two witnesses this evening, and then that would be brought forward to the next meeting or shared with members through email. And then obviously anything that we have that adds weight to a particular line of inquiry will then be recorded in the this committee's report going forward. So if Chairman, if members are happy to, if they've got nothing that's leaping to mind at the moment, to send those inquiries to the governance email account, and we will then progress those thoughts further on behalf of members. Is that okay?
I'm taking their silence as assent. I'm sure that is okay. We will now thank Steve and Stuart once again for their attendance. Thank you very much. And for their contribution to the meeting. It has been a very interesting and useful session, and we appreciate the time you've given to assist us with our review. And if you would now like to disappear, we quite understand. Members, as there are no formal recommendations this evening, I will now proceed to agenda item number 6, which is urgent business. And I don't think we have any urgent business.
No, Chairman, there's no urgent business for this evening. Thank you.
So, as we have no urgent business, this item concludes our business for this evening. And I will close this meeting of the Partnership Development Scrutiny Committee at 8:01. Thank you, members, for your attendance this evening, and to those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. I will now hand over to the meeting facilitator.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, before we ask the webcasting officer to terminate the broadcast, just to remind members, we will be retaining performance data to your connections to this meeting. As I said, Chairman, at the beginning of this meeting, this is a non-decision making meeting of the Partnership Development Scrutiny Committee. This has been an evidence gathering session and no decisions have been made during the course of this meeting. Members, I thank you very much for your attendance this evening, and could I ask the webcasting officer to terminate the broadcast?